The warning came through every communication channel across the galaxy at exactly the same moment. From the crystal singers of Voltara Prime to the quantum networks of the hegemony worlds, the message burned itself into every receiver with the weight of absolute truth. The silence has awakened. The cycle begins again. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of humanity's newest deep space monitoring station, watching as the translation algorithms struggled to make sense of the flood of alien communications that followed. Her weathered hands gripped the edge of the holographic display as species after species across the known galaxy began transmitting the same type of message. Evacuation orders. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Torres from his station, his voice tight with confusion. "The Altarian Republic just ordered the complete withdrawal of all their fleets to their core systems. They're abandoning 17 colonies. The Keth Dominion is doing the same," reported Commander Hassan. "They're pulling back from the entire outer spiral. Some of these worlds have been inhabited for thousands of years." Chen watched the tactical display as red indicators began appearing across the galaxy map. Entire civilizations, some with histories spanning millions of years, were retreating to their homeworlds. The great trade routes that had connected thousands of species for eons were going dark one by one. "What about the Varan?" Chen asked. The Varan were known for their warrior culture, a proud species that had never backed down from any threat in their recorded history. "They've sealed their borders completely," Torres replied, his face pale. "No ships in or out. They've gone silent." The implications hit Chen like a physical blow. In her 30 years of military service, she had learned to read patterns, to understand what the movements of armies and fleets really meant. This wasn't a strategic withdrawal or a temporary retreat. This was something else entirely. On the main screen, the face of Ambassador Kithara appeared. The tall, insectoid Altarian's usually composed features showed something Chen had never seen before: pure, primal terror. "Admiral Chen," the ambassador began, her translated voice carrying undertones of desperate urgency. "Your species must understand. The silence has returned. You have perhaps days before it reaches this sector." "What is the silence?" Chen asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. The ambassador's compound eyes seemed to lose focus, as if she were looking at something beyond the present moment. "Ancient records speak of it, a force that appears every few million years, consuming not just matter and energy, but the very possibility of existence itself. Where it passes, there is nothing. Not empty space, not darkness, but true nothingness." Chen felt a chill run down her spine. "How do you fight something like that?" "You do not fight the silence," Kithara replied with quiet finality. "You survive it. Some civilizations build massive shields around their core worlds. Others hide in pocket dimensions or the spaces between realities. The records show that when the silence comes, between 60 and 80% of all galactic civilizations simply cease. They are not destroyed. They are made to have never been. And the rest? Endure. Wait. Hide until it passes back into whatever realm it comes from." The cycle has repeated 7 times since the first records began. Each time, those who survive begin again, rebuilding, expanding, until the galaxy is once more filled with life and hope. Then the silence returns. Chen stared at the ambassador, her mind racing. "How long does it take to pass?" "Between 2,000 and 3,000 years. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. 3,000 years. Every human civilization would be dust before the threat ended. Their children's children's children would never see the stars again. "I must go now," the ambassador continued. "My people's ships depart within the hour. Admiral Chen, I have grown to respect your species during our brief contact. You show promise, creativity, determination, but promise means nothing against the silence. Take what ships you can. Find the deepest hole in space you can hide in, and pray that when the galaxy awakens again, there will still be humans left to see it." The transmission ended, leaving Chen staring at a blank screen. Around her, the command center had gone silent. Every human present had heard the conversation, understood the implications. "Orders, ma'am?" Torres asked quietly. Chen looked around at her crew. Young faces. Mostly. People who had joined the space service to explore, to push the boundaries of human knowledge and reach. People who believed in tomorrow. "Get me a connection to Earth Command," she said, "and start pulling together every piece of data we have on this silence phenomenon. If every other species in the galaxy is running, I want to know exactly what they're running from." Over the next 72 hours, the information that flowed into human space painted an increasingly grim picture. The galaxy's oldest civilizations, species that had survived multiple cycles of the silence, were unanimous in their approach. Retreat, hide, endure. Some had developed incredible technologies specifically for this purpose. Entire star systems that could be folded into hidden dimensions. Populations that could be placed in temporal stasis for millennia. Defensive systems that could make planets simply invisible to any form of detection. But every record Chen's team uncovered told the same story. Fighting the silence was impossible. It wasn't a weapon or an enemy in any traditional sense. It was more like a natural disaster on a cosmic scale. As unstoppable as entropy itself. The first direct observation came from the Perseus Arm monitoring station. Dr. Elizabeth Walsh, the station's chief scientist, transmitted her findings with a voice that shook with barely controlled panic. "It's not coming through normal space," she reported. "Whatever this thing is, it's moving through dimensions we can barely detect, let alone understand." "But Admiral, the effects are visible. The Karen system just stopped existing. Not destroyed. Not exploded. I'm looking at space where there used to be a star, 6 planets, and 3 billion inhabitants. The star charts still show it should be there. Our gravitational sensors say there should be mass there. But when you look with any instrument that detects actual matter or energy, there's nothing. Not empty space. True void." Chen studied the sensor readings, her scientific background helping her grasp the impossible nature of what she was seeing. The silence wasn't destroying things in any way that made physical sense. It was somehow editing them out of reality itself. "How fast is it moving?" she asked. "At current rate, it will reach the solar system in approximately 6 weeks. 6 weeks to evacuate 8 billion people to where? Hide an entire civilization where? The other species had millions of years to prepare for this moment. Technologies and strategies passed down through countless generations. Humanity had 6 weeks. The debates that raged across Earth's leadership were fierce, but brief. There simply wasn't time for extended discussion. Some proposed immediate evacuation to the furthest colonies, hoping distance might provide safety. Others suggested attempting to replicate the dimensional hiding technologies that other species used, though human science was centuries behind in that field. But as Chen watched the discussions, she noticed something that set humanity apart from every other species they had contact with. Where the aliens spoke of survival and endurance, of waiting out the storm, humans kept asking the same question: how do we fight it? The question seemed to puzzle their alien contacts. The few species still maintaining communication before their own withdrawals all gave the same response: "You don't fight the silence. You survive it." Fighting was not only impossible, it was meaningless. But humans, Chen realized, didn't seem to understand the concept of meaningless resistance. Even when faced with the extinction of everything they had ever known or hoped to become, the first instinct wasn't to hide. It was to figure out how to punch the apocalypse in the face. Dr. Marcus Webb, Earth's leading theoretical physicist, summed it up during an emergency session of the Global Defense Council. "Every piece of data we've received indicates that direct resistance is futile. The smart play, the logical play, is to take the advice we've been given and try to preserve what we can of human civilization until this passes." He paused, looking around the room at the assembled leaders of humanity. "But that's not what we're going to do, is it?" The silence that followed wasn't the empty void of the approaching silence. It was the quiet of people making a decision that would define their species for all time. Chen could feel it in the room, the weight of a choice that went against every piece of advice they had received, against every example of galactic wisdom accumulated over millions of years. Fleet Admiral Jackson, the highest-ranking military officer present, spoke first. How long do we have to prepare? 5 weeks, 4 days, Chen replied. Then we have 5 weeks and 4 days to figure out how to kill something that has been murdering civilizations since before Earth cooled. Dr. Webb, I want every human scientist working on this. Dr. Chen, I want every ship we have ready for combat operations. And I want someone to send a message to every species that's still listening. 1. What kind of message, sir? Jackson's smile was grim but determined. Tell them that the human race appreciates the warning, but will be staying. If anyone wants to see how you fight the impossible, they're welcome to stick around and watch. As the meeting dispersed and humanity began its desperate preparations, Chen found herself thinking about the ambassador's words. The other species had called humans creative, determined, full of promise, but they had also assumed that these qualities would lead to the same logical conclusion that every other species had reached. Perhaps they had misunderstood what human determination really meant. The galaxy was turning away, as it had 7 times before. Ancient, wise civilizations, with millions of years of experience, were making the only rational choice available to them. But rationality, Chen was beginning to understand, might not be humanity's strongest trait after all. The transformation of human space in the following weeks defied every prediction the fleeing alien civilizations had made about how a young species would react to imminent extinction. Where they expected panic, confusion, or desperate attempts at flight, they found something entirely different. They found humanity at work. Dr. Sarah Okafor stood in what had once been the Large Hadron Collider's control room, now expanded into a facility that stretched for dozens of kilometers beneath the Swiss countryside. Banks of quantum computers hummed with calculations that would have seemed impossible just months before. Above her, holographic displays showed the structure of reality itself being mapped, analyzed, and dissected by human minds that refused to accept the word impossible. Show me the latest readings from the probe, she said to her team. The main display shifted to show data from humanity's most desperate gambit yet. 3 weeks earlier, they had launched an unmanned probe directly toward the advancing edge of the silence. Every alien species that still maintained communication had called it suicide, insanity, a waste of precious resources that should be used for evacuation. But the probe had survived. More than that, it had gathered data. Dr. Chen Wei-Xing, the mission's lead engineer, highlighted sections of the readout. The probe confirms our theoretical models. The silence isn't destroying matter in any conventional sense. It's somehow shifting it out of phase with our dimensional reality. But look at this. He pointed to a section of the data that pulsed with steady rhythms. There's a pattern here. A frequency. The silence isn't random, it's organized. Structured. Almost like a machine, Okafor finished. A cosmic-scale piece of technology. The implications sent ripples of excitement through the research team. If the silence was a machine, even one beyond their current understanding, that meant it operated according to principles. It had weaknesses, limitations, perhaps even an off switch. Ma'am, called Dr. James Crawford from across the room. We're getting a transmission from the Altarian refugee fleet. They're requesting permission to observe our research. Okafor raised an eyebrow. The Altarians had been among the first to flee, retreating to prepared shelters in distant galaxy clusters. Why would they want to observe us? I thought we were all insane. The transmission came through moments later. Ambassador Kithara's image appeared, but she was no longer alone. Behind her stood representatives of a dozen species, all watching with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely contained hope. Dr. Okafor, the ambassador began. Our long-range sensors have been monitoring your probe mission. The data you're gathering is unprecedented. In 7 cycles of the silence, no species has ever attempted direct observation. We believed it was impossible. We've learned not to trust the word impossible, Okafor replied. What we're seeing suggests the silence is more complex than your records indicate. We think we might be able to interfere with its operation. The silence that followed her words stretched across interstellar distances. When the ambassador finally spoke, her voice carried an emotion that the translation system struggled to convey. Dr. Okafor, What you are suggesting has never been attempted. The computational models alone would require processing power beyond what any single species has ever developed. The energy requirements would dwarf the output of multiple star systems. Even if such a thing were theoretically possible, you have weeks, not centuries. You're right, Okafor agreed. It's impossible for any single species. But what if it wasn't just one species? The proposal that emerged from that conversation would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. Humanity was asking the galaxy's refugees to share their most advanced technologies, their deepest scientific secrets, their most powerful computing resources. They were asking ancient civilizations to trust a species that had been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries, with knowledge accumulated over millions of years. They were asking them to bet everything on the impossible. The response came faster than anyone had expected. Within hours, data streams began flowing into human research facilities from across the galaxy. Technologies that would have taken humanity millennia to develop were shared freely. The Kessel hegemony transmitted the specifications for their reality manipulation engines, the Varan. Breaking their total communication silence for the first time, sent detailed plans for dimensional anchor points that could hold objects stable across multiple layers of reality. Most surprising of all was the contribution from the Eternal Archive, a collective of artificial intelligences so advanced that most species considered them more myth than reality. They transmitted not just data, but actual computational support, vast networks of quantum processors that expanded humanity's research capabilities by orders of magnitude. Fleet Admiral Jackson found himself commanding the largest combined fleet in galactic history. Ships from dozens of species, many of which had been enemies for centuries, now worked side by side to construct what the humans had designated Project Defiance. The name itself had become a rallying cry across the galaxy. "Status report," Jackson called out as he entered the command center of the project's main construction platform. Captain Morrison, his chief of staff, gestured toward the massive structure taking shape outside their viewport. "The primary array is 70% complete. The Altarian reality anchors are online, and the Kessel dimensional manipulators are being installed now. The real miracle is the power system." Jackson looked at the fusion of technologies that would have been impossible without galaxy-wide cooperation. At the heart of Project Defiance was a human innovation that had stunned their alien allies, a power core that could tap directly into the quantum foam that underlay reality itself. It was dangerous, unstable, and completely untested on this scale. It was also the only thing with enough power to fuel their plan. "What about the frequency modulation systems?" Jackson asked. "That's where things get interesting," Morrison replied with a grin. "The humans working on that section came up with something our alien friends are calling either brilliant or insane. They're using music." Jackson blinked. "Music?" "Specifically, the mathematical structures underlying human musical harmony. Turns out the patterns we use in composition chord progressions, rhythm, harmonic resonance, they map almost perfectly onto the frequency patterns the silence uses to phase matter out of reality. The theory is that if we can create a harmonic counterpoint to the silence's song, we might be able to not just resist it, but actively disrupt it." It was the most human solution imaginable, turning the tools of art and beauty into weapons of mathematical precision. Dr. Sarah Chen, who had first detected the silence's approach, now found herself leading the team responsible for what they were calling the harmonic disruptor. The device itself was a fusion of crystalline resonators from 12 different species, all tuned to frequencies derived from human musical theory. "The test run is in 6 hours, she announced to her team. "We'll have exactly one chance to get this right. If the calculations are wrong, if the harmonic matrix is off by even a few decimal places, we could end up accelerating the silence's advance instead of stopping it." Dr. Webb, who had been working without sleep for 3 days straight, looked up from his calculations. "The mathematical models all check out. The question is whether reality will cooperate with our math." "Reality has been cooperating with human stubbornness so far," Chen replied. "Let's see how far we can push our luck." The galaxy watched as the final components of Project Defiance were assembled. What they had built defied classification, part weapon, part defensive system. part massive musical instrument designed to play a song that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics in localized space. As the moment of activation approached, communications came in from across the galaxy. Species that had maintained absolute radio silence since the silence's approach began transmission one last time. The messages were simple, translated into every known language. To humanity and all who stand with them, you have given us something we had forgotten. Hope. Dr. Okafor stood in the primary control center, watching as systems came online one by one. The power readings alone were staggering. They were about to channel more energy than most civilizations used in a year, focusing it into a precise harmonic pattern that would either save the galaxy or destroy everything they were trying to protect. All stations report ready, came the announcement from the coordination center. Jackson's voice echoed across all communication channels, reaching not just the combined fleets, but monitoring stations throughout galactic space. This is Fleet Admiral Jackson to all vessels and installations. In approximately 90 seconds, we're going to attempt something that has never been tried in the history of the galaxy. We're going to fight the silence. He paused, looking out at the massive array that represented the combined knowledge and hope of dozens of civilizations. Every species that helped build this asked us the same question: why? Why not take the safe path? Why not hide and wait like every other civilization has done? I'll tell you why. Because running away means accepting that some things are bigger than us, stronger than us, beyond our ability to change. And humans have never been very good at accepting that. The countdown began, and across human space, people stopped what they were doing to watch. On Earth, in the orbital habitats, on distant colony worlds, 8 billion humans and billions more aliens held their breath. 10 seconds to activation. Dr. Chen's hand hovered over the final activation switch. Everything they had learned, everything they had built, everything they hoped for, came down to this moment. 5 seconds. The harmonic resonators began to sing, a sound that was felt rather than heard, a mathematical poem written in the language of quantum mechanics. Activation in 3, 2, 1. Chen pressed the switch, and Project Defiance erupted into operation. Energy levels spiked beyond anything ever recorded. The harmonic disruptors began their complex symphony, sending waves of precisely tuned disruption, racing toward the advancing edge of the silence. For a moment that seemed to stretch across eternity, nothing happened. Then space itself began to sing back. The response came not as sound, but as a fundamental vibration that seemed to shake the very foundation of reality. Across the monitoring stations, impossible readings began appearing on instruments designed to measure the deepest structures of space and time. Dr. Sarah Okafor watched in amazement as the harmonic disruptors achieved something that millions of years of galactic civilization had deemed impossible. The silence was answering them. Energy feedback is stabilizing, reported Dr. Webb, his voice tight with excitement and terror. The harmonic matrix is holding. But look at these dimensional readings. The silence isn't just responding to our signal, it's modifying its own frequency pattern. On the main display, the chaotic, reality-erasing advance of the silence began to show structure, organization, almost like a conversation emerging from static. The cosmic phenomenon that had terrorized the galaxy for eons was revealing itself to be something far more complex than anyone had imagined. "It's not a weapon," whispered Dr. Chen, her face illuminated by the data streams flowing across her console. "It's not a natural disaster. It's trying to communicate." The realization hit the research team like a physical blow. For millions of years, galactic civilizations had fled from what they believed was an unstoppable force of destruction. But humanity's stubborn refusal to run, their insistence on fighting the unfightable, had uncovered a truth that changed everything. The silence was alive. Ambassador Kaithara's voice crackled through the communications array, heavy with an emotion that transcended species barriers. "How is this possible? Our oldest records, spanning 7 complete cycles, there was never any indication of intelligence, of purpose beyond destruction. Because no one ever tried to talk to it before," Admiral Jackson replied from the Fleet Command Center. "Every time it appeared, every civilization did exactly what logic dictated. They ran. They hid. They treated it as a natural disaster to be endured, rather than a mystery to be solved. 1. Things arde de bound. When resented as arde de bound bien. They hid the send de bound be endured. They hid the send de bound be endured. The harmonic disruptors continued their complex song. And with each passing hour, the pattern of response from the silence became clearer. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the project's lead xenolinguist, worked frantically to decode what was becoming recognizable as a form of communication. It's mathematical, she announced to the assembled team, but not mathematics as we understand it. The patterns suggest a form of consciousness that exists across dimensional boundaries. It's not destroying matter, it's trying to translate it. Move it to a different layer of reality. But why? Asked Fleet Admiral Jackson. What's the purpose? The answer came not from the research team, but from the silence itself. As the harmonic exchange continued, images began forming in the quantum resonance patterns, not visual images, but mathematical concepts so pure they bypassed normal sensory interpretation and spoke directly to the mind. What humanity and their allies saw was the history of the galaxy from a perspective that no biological life form had ever experienced. They saw the silence as it truly was not a destroyer, but a gardener. Every few million years, when galactic civilization reached a certain level of complexity, when the accumulated weight of technology and expansion began to strain the fundamental structures of reality itself, the silence would arrive. Its purpose was not destruction, but preservation, carefully moving civilizations and their works to stable dimensional layers where they could continue to exist without threatening the universe's structural integrity. The problem was that the process required the voluntary cooperation of the civilizations being preserved. But every species that had encountered the silence had fled in terror before communication could be established. The silence had been forced to act unilaterally, preserving what it could while the civilizations it was trying to help treated it as an enemy. We're looking at the biggest misunderstanding in galactic history, Dr. Okafor said, her voice filled with wonder. Millions of civilizations that were never destroyed, they were saved, moved to dimensional safe havens where they've continued to exist and develop for millions of years. The implications were staggering. The galaxy wasn't experiencing cyclical apocalypses. It was undergoing regular conservation efforts by an intelligence so vast and alien that biological life forms had never recognized it as such. But humanity's response had changed everything. By refusing to flee, by insisting on communication rather than submission, they had opened the first real dialogue between the silence and galactic civilization in recorded history. The silence, it turned out, was desperately relieved to finally have someone to talk to. Over the following days, as the harmonic exchange continued and communication protocols were established, a new picture of the galaxy's future began to emerge. The dimensional preserves where previous civilizations had been relocated weren't prisons or museums. They were thriving communities of unimaginable diversity and advancement. The Thakari collective that vanished 3 cycles ago, reported Dr. Vasquez, reading from the latest communication exchange. They've developed technologies that let them create entire pocket universes. The Veltar Empire from the 5th cycle has learned to exist as pure information, inhabiting quantum computer systems the size of solar systems. Each revelation was more astounding than the last. The civilizations that galactic history recorded as extinct had actually achieved levels of development that made current technology look primitive. They had been waiting, hoping that someday the younger species would overcome their fear and join them willingly. But perhaps the most significant discovery was what the silence revealed about the current situation. The dimensional strain that triggered its awakening this cycle was different from all previous instances. The galaxy had reached a level of technological and social complexity that couldn't be preserved through simple relocation. This time, the silence needed partners. Admiral Jackson stood before the assembled representatives of every major galactic civilization, most of whom had emerged from their hiding places when the news of successful communication spread. The meeting was being held aboard a massive diplomatic station that had been constructed in the neutral zone between human space and the leading edge of the silence's advance. The offer is unprecedented, Jackson announced. The silence, which has asked to be called the Preservation Protocol, is willing to share its dimensional manipulation technology with biological civilizations. In exchange, It wants our help in managing the transition to preserve not just individual species, but the current galactic community as a functioning whole. The Altarian representative, who had spent the past week in continuous communication with her government, spoke first. The implications are beyond our current ability to fully comprehend. We would be gaining access to technologies that could make scarcity, resource depletion, even entropy itself manageable problems. But we would also be accepting responsibility for shepherding the galaxy through its next phase of development. The alternative, said Dr. Chen from her position as humanity's chief science representative, is the same cycle repeating endlessly. Civilizations developing, reaching limits, being preserved separately while the galaxy starts over from the beginning. The protocol has been trying to break this cycle for millions of years, but it needed biological partners capable of managing the social and cultural aspects of galactic preservation. The Varan representative, a massive warrior whose species had been silent until now, stood slowly. You ask us to trust an entity that our ancestors have feared for millennia, to accept transformation beyond our current comprehension. This is not a small thing you propose. No, Jackson agreed, it's not small. But consider the alternative. We can continue the old pattern, hide, wait, start over, repeat forever. Or we can take the risk that's been offered to us. Work with the protocol to preserve not just our individual civilizations, but everything we've built together. The trade networks, the cultural exchanges, the accumulated knowledge of thousands of species working together. The debate that followed lasted for days, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Humanity had already demonstrated what was possible when species chose cooperation over fear, progress over safety. One by one, the galactic civilizations agreed to participate in what would come to be known as the Great Transition. The process took years, not days. Using technology shared by the protocol, reality anchors were established throughout galactic space. Entire star systems were carefully moved to dimensional preserves that existed parallel to normal space but remained fully accessible. Civilizations could expand, develop, and interact without straining the universe's fundamental structure. Dr. Okafor, now elderly and honored as one of the architects of the new galactic order, stood in the observation deck of the Harmony Station, humanity's first installation in what was being called the Preserved Galaxy. Through the transparent walls, she could see impossible sights, stars that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, planets that housed dozens of different civilizations in overlapping reality layers, space itself that had been made more stable and hospitable than ever before. Status report from the outer spiral? She asked her aide, a young officer whose species hadn't even achieved spaceflight when the crisis began. The Carrion Republic has completed their dimensional migration. They're reporting that they've made contact with 3 civilizations from previous cycles. Apparently, the collective knowledge sharing has accelerated their development by several thousand years. Okafor smiled. It was still hard to believe how completely their understanding of the galaxy had changed. What had seemed like an apocalypse had revealed itself to be an invitation to transcendence. Ma'am, the aide continued, there's a message for you from the protocol itself. The communication that arrived wasn't in words or images, but in the pure mathematical harmony that had become the standard for protocol contact. Translated, the message was simple but profound. Thank you for teaching us that the word impossible is just an invitation to try harder. Okafor laughed, recognizing the echo of human stubbornness that had somehow become galactic policy. The protocol had learned from humanity just as much as humanity had learned from it. The ancient intelligence that had spent eons trying to preserve civilizations had discovered that the best way to save something was to give it the tools to save itself. Send a reply, Okafor instructed. Tell the protocol that we're ready for whatever comes next. Outside the station, the galaxy hummed with activity that spanned multiple dimensions. Civilizations that had been separated by millions of years were working together on projects that would have been unimaginable in the old reality. The cycle of destruction and renewal that had defined galactic history for eons had been broken, replaced by something unprecedented, a galaxy that could grow and develop without limits. All because humanity had looked at the approaching apocalypse and asked a simple question. How do we fight it? The galaxy had turned away, as wisdom and experience dictated it should. Ancient civilizations with millions of years of accumulated knowledge had made the only rational choice available, but humanity had chosen the irrational alternative. They had chosen to stand and fight the impossible, to seek communication where others saw only destruction, to treat a cosmic mystery as a problem to be solved rather than a disaster to be endured. And in doing so, they had discovered that sometimes the most important victories aren't won by those who fight the hardest or plan the best. Sometimes they're won by those who simply refuse to accept that victory is impossible. The galaxy would never be the same. And that, everyone agreed, was exactly as it should be.